How is designing a golf course like designing a city? According to Beau Welling, the goal is the same: to help people feel and be more human. Beau Welling is the principal architect of Beau Welling Design, and in addition to collaborating with Tiger Woods and designing courses like Bluejack National and the Fields Ranch West course at PGA Frisco, Beau is an experienced landscape designer and urban planner. So today, we're talking about the links between creating golf courses and creating places. I'm Garrett Morrison, and this is Designing Golf. So, Beau, what came first for you? Was it golf course design, or was it landscape design, land planning, urban planning, that whole area?
I mean, very much golf course design, with maybe an asterisk. But I grew up a golfer, and as I've just told you, I turned 55 yesterday, and I started playing golf when I was 2, so 53 years of this maddening experience. But I was very fortunate as a young person to go around and travel to lots of places, both with golf, but like also just like as a traveler. My grandparents, my parents are all travelers. Like going to Europe was something that would have done at a younger age, and sort of found public spaces in Europe very interesting. But golf was really my deal, and I was fortunate that we had family friends that were Augusta National members and family friends that were Cypress Point members, and so these two places were very impactful to me as a younger person, going to experience these cathedrals of golf, if you will, and sort of learning that each were designed by the same man. Like, that was just unbelievable to me. And so the first time I remember hearing of golf course design, it was learning that Alistair McKenzie had designed both of these places. And I went and got every book I could on McKenzie to learn about that. Not because I wanted to be a golf course designer. It's just I was like a nerdy kid, just sort of interested in all this. And so all that sort of became very interesting to me. And so fast forward, I played golf at the NCAA Brown Bear University in Providence, Rhode Island. And Brown's kind of a wacky, weird place. And there's no curriculum, and grades are optional. And I was debating, do I study something around science, or do I just study something around art? Like, that's how coherent I was. And I literally woke up one morning with this epiphany of like, wait a minute, golf course design, sort of engineering and technical, but artistic and creative. And right across the street was the Rhode Island School of Design, and they had landscape architecture. And so I started taking classes there. Tom Fazio was building a golf course in my hometown of Greenville, South Carolina. And I started bugging him, how does one become a golf course designer? And my father was one of the developers of this golf course. And so Tom was sort of forced to answer my phone call because I was like a son of a client. And that ultimately led to me going and working for him as a summer job, kind of all throughout college. And then years later, it would ultimately have, go to work for him full time. And so golf was very much, how I started out in this whole design universe. But I had been an appreciator, I think, of public space kind of along the way, and ultimately lived in Europe twice before I went to go work for Tom full time. And I think how we kind of ultimately got into more of this urban thinking and planning is I had gotten involved in golf course design because I was a golfer, the test of the game, greens, tees, bunkers. And somewhere along my Fazio journey, I started to realize that the projects that I thought were the coolest, yes, they had great greens, tees, bunkers, but I started observing that golf was a much bigger thing than that. It was a driver of connection amongst people. And I started to really look to golf through the lens of place, and like noticing how the game drove human connection, it promoted community. And then to me, the places that worked the best, they had spaces and places that allowed that connection to happen once people got off of the golf course. And so I got really interested in this idea of golf as a promoter of human connection and community. And that ultimately led us to start thinking more and more about like what happens around the 18 holes of golf. And sort of from that, ultimately, that started to drift into more planning around golf. And then somewhere along the way, I had a colleague that said, you don't have to have a golf course be in the middle of all the stuff that you're proselytizing about trying to get people to put phones down and actually talk to people and stuff like that. And so he happened to be a big commercial urban developer, and so he's the one that kind of got us first involved in a project that started to take us in this direction of sort of things without golf. But golf still is what got us here. It's still the bread and butter. It's still what I'm super passionate about. I just think we've found the opportunity to take some of our skill set and apply it in a holistic, big picture way around golf. And I think there have been people, I guess, thankfully, that have appreciated that thinking, that have taken us to go look at and do some projects that have nothing to do with golf as well. A long-winded answer to your question.
No, that's great. For those who don't know, your firm, Beau Welling Design, is distinctive in the sense that, yes, you design golf courses, but you've also taken on some projects that are not golf courses that in fact branch well out of that area. And that's part of the reason that you're such an interesting person to talk to about some of these matters. You mentioned earlier that in your childhood, during your travels, you saw some public spaces in Europe that fired up your imagination and got you thinking about how space and place promote human connection. What were some of those places in Europe? What's an example of how that kind of public gathering place can promote community or whatever else?
I mean, I think it'd be, it could be big famous plazas and piazzas in Italy. It could be smaller little town squares in Switzerland. It could really anywhere throughout Europe, you see these sort of squares and plazas and stuff. And I think one of the things that has always been cool to me, like, I'm not sure I put this connection together when I was visiting as a 14-year-old, but like later in life, I think you see how space really flexes. And so, like, one moment there's a flower market, and then all of a sudden by lunchtime it's transitioned to a food hall, a food sort of consumption. To all of a sudden there's some celebratory, communal event happening in the evening. But it becomes the life of the city, it's all sort of coming together. And, I did take this path through RISD and studying landscape architecture. And so I think there's a academic side of this to me too. And so, like, if Alistair McKenzie is a big golf course design influence, I think on the planning side, it would be Frederick Olmsted, which might be more park or, urban public space centric. But there'd also be a Danish urbanist named Jan Gehl. And I think, if you look just sort of cerebrally at things that they talk about, to me, it's all super interesting. And, Olmsted talks a lot about a park in terms of its, a place for humans really of all walks of life to come together and connect, in a way for the human soul to connect with nature. And that it's more than just a park. It's something that it relates to humans wanting to have this respite from the den of the city. And then you look at Gehl, and Gehl's, talks a lot about that life happens between buildings, not really in buildings. And so I think when we think about what we're passionate about golf, we're kind of into that McKenzie-esque sort of idea of, like, surely the greatest golf course is the one that provides the greatest pleasure to the greatest number of people. And so it's almost this Olmstedian sort of idea of, like, here's a thing for everyone. And so we're super into all of those things. And, one of my favorite McKenzie quotes, he talks about golf and other games being like, the whole purpose of them is to generate the communal welfare and health and happiness and all this kind of stuff. And so when I look at our practice, the sort of disparate practice of golf, and then, as you're alluding to, a couple of like big urban projects that have nothing to do with golf, I mean, it comes across as almost schizophrenic, but like the theme, the thread that ties all this together, I think, is this idea of trying to use space and place to affect human connection. And so, to answer your question, it's another long-winded answer, but it's like, it's gathering. It's places for gathering. Like when we're involved in urban stuff, it's that. Like in essence, like, it's what golf is too. It's a means and a reason to gather. But the effect of this gathering is something that's greater than just a scorecard, numbers on a scorecard, or just getting through life of going to your job or what have you. It's a moments to pause and do something and connect. And it's this sort of Gehl life happening. And I think the interesting thing about, I'm not a licensed landscape architect. And I think what's interesting is neither Olmsted or Gale were either. They were just sort of observational people. And so I think I come at this more from life experience and observation than it's like I'm this rigorously trained, planner or urbanist kind of thing.
What do you think is the difference between space and place? Is it partly what you're talking about here when a space becomes a location in the world where people gather and connect on a human level? Is that what turns a space into a place?
I think so. I mean, I think it's like I actually come from a long line of accountants, and this is how bizarre my Sunday dinner table was. People talking about tangible assets and intangible assets, and I've always sort of looked through the lens of these intangible assets of whether it be brand or IP or whatever it is. But I think space is to me like the physical construct of that. But then place, it starts to be this intangibleness to it. There's something about it, that you know it when you're there. You recognize this. And unfortunately, the word placemaking is, I think, radically overused. But it's overused because it means there is something to all of that. And I think you recognize when you go to a great place. I mean, you immediately, it resonates with you. And I think part of that's geometry and proportion. Part of that is what's happening there. The part of the fact is that we as a species feel comfortable coming there. It feels sort of all put together. I mean, people sometimes ask me like, well, this sort of non-golf planning, like what do you do in that part? And, if someone called us to say, hey, we want to plan some strip shopping center with a bunch of parking, like we wouldn't be interested in that at all. But if it's, hey, I want to do something really super small, but like it's going to be built around a little plaza, a little square, we'd be super excited about that because it's sort of doing this sort of same thing where you create reasons for the humans to sort of slow down and do something. And so sometimes it's going to be really big, huge scale things that we're involved in. And then sometimes it could be like super small. I mean, like we've even worked on people's like backyards with a couple fire pits and stuff like that. But I think that's what it is. And this light bulb that went off back to the golf was more than this is that I started to realize that like literally half my memories of my father were from the golf course. And I started looking around at my friendships and realizing that like, so many of them were either people I grew up playing golf with or people I'd come to play golf with or even people I'd met playing golf. And that's where it became really powerful to me. And I think sometimes for my detriment, I can talk about this too much because I think a lot of people want us just to talk greens, tees, bunkers, strategy, the game. And it's not that we're not passionate about that. We super are. But it's just we really feel like that golf can do something so much more than that. And, I'm prone to believe that, that if the world had more golfers, the world would be a better place. I mean, it's like a game based on values, integrity, honor, but it's also based on this camaraderie and human connection. And so I think anything that we can do to help promote that, like that's what we get excited about.
I agree. And I think the reason this subject is so important to discuss alongside of all the usual subjects of green design and bunker placement, et cetera, is that golf plays a role in modern society or can play a role in modern society, getting people out of their houses, away from their screens, away from virtual connection and into embodied connection, into kind of cohabitation of the same place. Golf is a powerful lure for that. And the extent to which design can enhance those connections that are made when people are out of their houses and away from their screens is very important. And that's why I think about it a lot. And I think that's probably why you think about it a lot as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we all went through COVID and, quickly found out like it's not super fun just to be cooped up in the house or, not with other people. I mean, I think the species inherently needs to be with others. And I think technology, as great as it is, it's allowing us to go do this, but it has created a dynamic where we are more connected and yet more apart at all the same time. And there's lots of great science on this and speakers on this. And if you go look at any sort of measure of sort of loneliness in the United States, it's like gone through the roof. But to your point, I think that golf is a real counterpoint to that in that it does get you off of a screen and it gets you out, with others. And, I'm a big believer in walking while playing golf, and it's not exercise per se. Well, that's great. But what I find is that when we walk, when we play golf, we talk. Whereas if we're driving on a cart, all of a sudden there's a means to pick up a phone or what have you. And so for us, this is throughout everything that we believe. So it's not just that like we do greens, tees, and bunkers over here, and we think about places or spaces outside of golf. In terms of how we design golf, like what we're trying to do is create an experience that can be enjoyed truly by everyone, regardless of skill level. And like every golf architect in the world says that. But I think to go do that is a whole nother thing. And not to be critical of anybody, but I think everyone says that, and then lots of people go put sand everywhere. Well, sand, a good player plays out of sand really well, and a not so good player doesn't. And so, we talk about playability, this idea of delivering a good experience to a person regardless of skill level, but it's more than that for us. Like we want people of different skill levels to be able to play together at the same time and also have a good experience. And that light bulb went off to me, 20 years ago. We had done a Fazio project called Sage Valley, and just sort of across the river from Augusta National. It's pine trees and lots of grass and pine straw, and it's like super open, super playable. Like you can miss your golf ball kind of anywhere and go find it and play it again. Not that it's easy, but one of my lifelong friends is not a really good golfer, but the nature of his business, he entertains a lot of people on the golf course, and so he started asking me to help him bring his clients to Sage. And I thought at first it was because it was a destination place with great service, great food, on-site accommodation. He has them all there. But what I started to realize is that he is a non-ish golfer. He plays golf, but he didn't grow up playing golf, probably like a 26 handicap. It was an environment that he felt comfortable entertaining his scratch handicap clients because he never felt like his game got in the way of their game. Like he didn't have to have them go help him look for golf balls. And so, and he could keep up and he could keep the pace of play. And even though his score might not be great, he could be with them. And that it was a connection thing that he was talking about. When I thought he was talking about the prestige of the place and the big steak and expensive wine and all this kind of stuff, it was so much more fundamental to that. And so I think that's a big part of what we're trying to do is create a place where a golf experience where everyone enjoys and enjoy together. And so sometimes I talk about that in that, like, I don't want to have my friendships segregated by handicap, right? I don't want my family to be segregated by handicap. I want to be able to go with people that are way better than me and people that are not as good as me, poor souls, and be able to go together and have a great experience.
I want to take a slight detour here away from golf. We'll come back to golf and talk about the implications of all of this for the design of the golf course itself. But I want to hear just a little bit about some of the pure site design or land planning or urban planning projects that you've done. Could you maybe just choose one as an example, like an elegant example of this type of project for people who may not be familiar with this kind of work? What would be a good example of a project that you've worked on? What were the goals of that project? And what did that kind of all look like from a broad strokes level viewpoint?
Sure. So there are kind of two that come to mind. So one is the first one really that we got involved in, which was 181 acres in downtown Columbia, South Carolina, which is the state capital. And so it's called Bull Street. And it was done by a Greenville-based developer. And it was the old South Carolina Department of Mental Health's campus, which is why there's so much acreage there, which was originally built around a sort of 1850s era asylum series of buildings. And so it very much was wanting to be, or the concept the developer wanted was a sort of walkable community, mixed use, lots of public space, gathering space. And so we have a minor league baseball stadium built and developed right in the middle of it. We have a big central green that has lots of, mixed use buildings sort of around that. We have a 20-acre park because lots of big trees and a stream going through. And then pretty intense development though in other zones. And so that was sort of the first one. And so we would have been involved in helping with the master plan and all the streetscapes and all the public space. But it was complicated because the duration of the development was going to be 25, 30 years. And so we had to plan in lots and lots of flexibility because it was so large. And so now the University of South Carolina's medical school is under construction there on site. And so it was really big. And so that one sort of got us going with the first real big thing outside of golf. And then that probably started in 2011 or 12 in terms of conceptualizing it. And, it's still ongoing in terms of its development. The one really not far from where I'm talking to you from right now, though, is in my hometown of Greenville, South Carolina. It's a place called Camperdown, and it's a 4-acre site that is mixed use of office, residential, hotel, retail. And it's right almost at the corner of Main and Main, if you will. So corner of Main and Broad Street. And it was a tricky thing in that the city had design guidelines that, in essence, all buildings had the front streets. But we wanted to have this central plaza be, in essence, behind buildings. So, in other words, we wanted buildings to front, had to have buildings front on the street, but we wanted to front on the central plaza as well. And Greenville's been, is one of these places that's been lauded as, one of the great places to live and great public spaces and all this kind of stuff. But it's very linear, like up and down Main Street, like these great sidewalks and outdoor cafes and stuff. But it's very much, if you would put a light on somebody, a pedestrian in Greenville, they're literally walking in a line all the time. So this was a real opportunity to do an eddy, like to get people to sort of stop and sort of operate in a different way, because this plaza is really big. And so to make all that work, though, we had a big parking challenge. And so the street is on a grade. And so we've extended the grade out for the plaza and have 3 rows of subterranean parking, 3 decks of subterranean parking below. And so it's really been a super fabulous thing. And there's all kinds of awesome stuff that happens on the plaza. There's a whole sort of nod to the history of Greenville, starting a textile place and sort of morphing into a very modern textile/automotive place. And it has really accomplished, I think, a lot for the city in terms of, being able to have events without having to close Main Street and things of that nature. And that's only 4 acres, but it's lots and lots of square footage of office, retail, hotel, and retail. And so very, very active thing. And so all that's been really neat. And I happened to be with the developer of that project this morning, and we're out under construction at the golf course where I grew up, and I was giving him a tour, and he was asking me what am I most afraid of with this golf project. And I said, well, if I don't get this right, I'm going to have to leave town. And we both laughed because we said the same thing when we were building this site in downtown Greenville. The reason 4 acres existed is that it's where the newspaper used to be. And so as the newspaper industry has evolved, there's not all this need for all this production and all these buildings, all this space. And so the site was purchased from the Greenville News and redeveloped into this pretty magnificent mixed-use space in downtown Greenville.
Well, that's such an interesting project. I'll sort of focus on the Camperdown project for a minute, because what you're describing is initially a very linear downtown where the tendency of people might be to walk up and down and not really settle. And what you were trying to do was to create a place to settle and concentrate the population of people that is outside and hanging out at a particular moment, and give them a reason to stop and be with each other, it sounds like.
That's exactly right. And so it accommodates for, lots of outdoor sort of cafe seating, but lots of just seating and spaces on the plaza itself. We have a stage there. It's curated. There are different events that happen, on the plaza. There's a very elaborate sail structure that goes over part of it. That's really cool, really modern looking. It's sort of part of the story of the theming of the thing. And so before the Greenville News, it was a big textile operation there. And so how it's all been designed on the plaza is a nod to the textile history. So some of the tiling looks like the fabrics that were made there. And we had a Yuri Suzuki, is a friend and great sculptor artist, sort of assemble an artist team to do all these different sculptures for us that are interactive in nature as well, in terms of like, there are things that look like a thread, part of the textile process, and the kids can hit on them and they make sounds and lights and stuff like that. And it's all really super lit up, and so it's a really cool space at night. And the sort of curation of events kind of goes back to that story I was trying to explain about Europe, about how different things could happen in the public squares throughout the day. There's very much an element of that of what we try to do at Camperdown is a way to get people to come out and hang out there. And said differently, it'd be kind of thing, we almost wanted people to think, hey, if I'm going to meet somebody downtown, you'd say, well, I'll just meet you at Camperdown. And like you would just go there and you'd find yourself on the plaza. Like you might park wherever you park, but you'd go there as a sort of meeting point and aggregation point.
Yeah, it's sort of a representation in miniature of what has happened generally with place design over the past century or so. The automobile has stretched things out, has made things more linear. We have strip malls, right? And it's all very kind of spread out and along one line. But of course, old places, and there's a reason why a lot of these places are in European cities, old places designed before the highway, before cars were a big part of daily life, tend to be just different in structure. They tend to have these kind of gathering places for people to get together and do their business, and they have to be designed in a way that people can walk to them. And so if you stretch them all out, then they don't work. But of course, there's something really pleasing about those places. There's something that really suits our nature as social beings, to have places that are not linear, that are not spread out. But now we need to kind of intentionally reintroduce them, because the economic logic of development is more to not do that, right? And so we need to intervene in the process almost and say, no, we want some of these plazas, we want some of these gathering points, because they suit our humanity.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt, like the cities that emerged organically, originally very much sort of very dense, clustered together. It's almost a species, like we want to be together. And even going way back, like the common land was like the land sort of outside the city. And in essence, that's how golf started. Actually, it was just on common land, that linked the urbanity down to the sea. But if you look at America, like, our evolution, we're a much newer place, and, the automobile influenced us dramatically and created suburbia. I think the theory was we should live here and you should work over here and you should go play over here. And so that spread everything out. And I think we started to realize is, living, working, playing in the same place, there's some value in all of that. And so, you see this sort of new urbanization or re-urbanization of places that are trying to do this. We really put density, close together, but then have places for that density to then go be common. The only challenge now is we have to deal with the automobile, and whereas way back when Florence was happening, nobody's worried about an automobile and stuff like that. And so, I mean, not to be too much of a futurist, but like, I think one of the reasons the planning folks are super excited about, advancements with, autonomous vehicles is like, the amount of infrastructure that's dedicated to the automobile in urban areas is unbelievable. Whether it be surface parking lots, streets themselves, parking structures. And so if that ever changes in a big way, it's going to be a really unique sort of opportunity, I think, to reimagine a lot of public space and a lot of downtown urban space. And I think that could be like super, super exciting.
Today's episode of Designing Golf is brought to you by Perfect Practice. So golf season is approaching. It's just starting to get warm here in Oregon, and I haven't played an awful lot in the off season, but I've been using my Perfect Practice putting mat to get my putting stroke dialed in. And I have high hopes for that part of my game this year, maybe foolishly, but I do have high hopes. This is a very realistic putting experience. The mat is made of this unique sort of crystal velvet material that allows for a smooth and accurate ball movement. It's a lot like an actual well-maintained putting green, except of course that it automatically returns the ball to you. And the way it's designed with the different lines and alignment aids, I think it's fun and challenging for a variety of skill levels. So if you're an average player, you'll get a lot out of it. But also if you're a very skilled player, I think there's an extra level of precision that you can go for here. So even when it's been raining lately, I've been able to work on my putting stroke pretty much anytime and anywhere. Perfect Practice putting mats are available at retail stores, including Dick's Sporting Goods, and online at perfectpractice.com. You can use the code DESIGN to get 20% off your purchase. That way you'll get a super high quality practice aid at a great price, and you'll be supporting this very podcast. Again, that's perfectpractice.com, code DESIGN. All right, let's get back to the episode. So I want to apply some of these ideas to golf now. There are a number of different ways that we could do that. Maybe we could just start by talking about the location of golf courses within one of these new planned urban developments, because that is complicated. My understanding is that a lot of urbanists don't really like golf, maybe for the understandable reason that golf takes up a lot of land, and building golf courses tends to require cars, tends to require, locating the golf course in a far off spot so there's enough space and people drive out there. And that kind of goes against a lot of these principles that we're talking about. So I guess first of all, how can golf courses be made part of a development like this that prioritizes walkability and human connection? Is that possible with golf?
Yeah, I think so. I think golf development's complicated, for many factors in terms of cost, regulation, et cetera. But, I think an example of sort of these two universes sort of coming together that at least we've been involved in would be PGA Frisco. So, our role there is we did the West course and did all the practice facilities, and then Gil did the East course. We collaborated on the short course, but we serve as the planners of the whole thing. And so what's happening there outside of golf is a 500-room Omni hotel, PGA's headquarters, a bunch of golf-oriented retail and entertainment facilities and structures, as well as the North Texas section's headquarters. And so how that worked there is the site's 660 acres, but only about 60 or 70 acres was really outside of the floodplain. And so the golf, in essence, a lot of the golf occupies the floodplain because that wasn't going to be buildable, developable in any way. But the development that's happened around it, from the hotel to this retail village to the clubhouse to sections and PGA America's headquarters, all that's very much linked on a big pedestrian access. And so when people go to PGA Frisco, it feels chaotic. But that's by design. It's literally like an urban space has met golf. And I think one of the things that's really cool about PGA Frisco is that you've got people learning the game of golf at the North Texas sections facility. You obviously have these championships. The women's PGA Championship will happen this year on the East course. And you got lots of tourist people coming to play these two great championship golf courses. But you have a lot of local people in Frisco going there to hang out, and because it's just a cool environment. The 2 acres of putting is free, and it sort of centers the retail village where there's different food and beverage outlets and whatnot. And so it very much has the sort of den of a public urban space in many, many ways, but yet it all sort of worked, and that the golf was sort of down in the floodplain. Maybe that's a unique situation, and one could argue that Frisco itself is a unique place in America. But I think that even in some of our more traditional, let's call it private club, new development stuff, it used to be that residential wanted to have, on golf or the big view or what have you. But what we're finding now is that what the market values the most is actually density around the clubhouse or around the core, as we call it, because it allows for you to have this walkable kind of experience. And so, we're very much into trying to design more residential-oriented places or resort-oriented places where if you show up, whether you're a member or a guest or what have you, that you park your car, and as long as you're on property, that's really the only time you're in an automobile. Now, maybe you're in a golf cart, but we're trying to get it where it's really logical to walk to lots of places. And I think that resonates on lots of levels, but it's also this human level I'm trying to speak to, because as soon as you're walking to, from your cottage or house or what have you to the club, you're running into other people while you're walking. And it's not just that you're zooming into a parking lot and running into a building. And so I think this sort of permeates through, lots and lots of stuff that we do. I think golf, we're seeing a lot of, golf redevelopment, of taking existing golf courses or existing failed spaces, what have you, and trying to sort of reimagine, redevelop golf. And I think that allows us to get into sort of more closer to urban sort of situations. But there's no doubt, in the layout of new greenfield construction, there's substantial greater connectivity that's happening amongst the different uses on site.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying makes me think of how the design of a golf course, the land plan of a golf course in relation to whatever development is closest to it or whatever city is closest to it could change a little bit. Instead of kind of stringing out houses along the golf course, maybe instead we think about concentrating residential and retail in these particular cores, as you put it, and having the origin point of the golf course also be near that core. But then the golf course gets to wander out, and it doesn't necessarily need to be developed all along its fairways, right? Strung out so that the development is all over the place. Instead, the buildings are kind of in one spot where you can walk from place to place, and then you can also go to the first tee of the golf course, but the golf course then takes you out somewhere else. Does that make sense as a kind of structure for one of these places? And is that sort of what you tried at Frisco, I guess?
Yeah, it does. I mean, every place is different, in terms of zoning and what the rules are, and kind of going back to the evolution of the American city and the rise of suburbia, this sort of separating housing and working and shopping, like all that was highly driven by zoning, and so to some degree, you have regulatory attempts to preserve land by having large acre zoning, but what that actually does is it just spreads it all out, and spreads infrastructure out. And I think what we're seeing, both is this sort of return to urbanism. And so sometimes it manifests itself as new urbanism, but the whole idea of clustering development, allowing denser development to happen in those clusters and sort of in trade for more open space. And so sometimes we get into locations where golf is counted as open space. Sometimes it's not counted as open space. But where it is counted as open space, it's much easier to start talking about the sort of style of development that you just mentioned. And obviously, as golfers, we really like that. That harkens back to what I tried to say to earlier. The origins of golf were exactly that. It was that there was
that's
urban
the old course,
stuff.
basically. That's the structure of the old course.
You go out to the sea, and then you come back to urban. And so I think there's something that's really neat about that. Sometimes we're not able to do that with underlying zoning. Sometimes clients don't want that. But I think what we're finding, what I was trying to speak to earlier, was the marketplace is increasingly wanting something different, I think, than say when I got involved in this business in the late 80s, where golf was like a string of pearls with, homes going out. I mean, golf holes going out with homes on each side. Like it's very rare these days that we're dealt with a situation where we're looking at routings that are have housing on each side. So at a minimum, we're starting to put two holes together, if not all holes together, and any sort of other use happens sort of outside of the golf.
When it comes to the golf course itself, how do you think about making a golf course a place as opposed to an empty space?
I mean, so I think it starts with the golf experience itself, of having, something that's fun and enjoyable and it's dramatic and there's something special about it. And how it's maintained, what it is. I mean, I think that's obviously a big part of it. But I think what happens, the experiential things that happen in it and around it become super important, and how that works and flows. It sort of gets back into what you were saying earlier about the concept of a cluster. But you could have a cluster of stuff, but it's all got to work and be intuitive and how it flow and this kind of stuff. And we've certainly seen the sort of rise of sort of outdoor sort of food and beverage and spaces that are very much activating to, say, practice facilities or short courses or short game areas, as well as the word comfort station on the golf course is starting to morph into its own huge thing. But again, the common part of these things, though, in my mind, they're all ways to slow people down and sit and engage. And I think that's what it is. And so it's unique landscape, unique site, great golf, a real nod to flow and function, that it all flows and functions well, as providing these eddies again, or spaces where people can stop, and whether it means sitting and having a drink or something to eat, or just literally a place to sit and talk or what have you. And so every site is unique and different. I think that and every project is. I think when I got involved in this nearly 30 years ago, I thought there'd be some sameness to projects. And I think every year I'm always sort of shaking my head like how wrong I was about that, because everything always is sort of unique and different. And I think part of that is people, like the people you're working for are different. Part of it's the land itself is sort of different. And then the world is sort of changing all the time. And so, we talk about things now that we never used to talk about. And I was down somewhere last week, and we were trying to commit someone. They needed to convert part of their course into a short course. And I started getting questioned a lot about, well, how do you know that this isn't a fad? Maybe a short course is just a fad. And like, I can't predict the future. I don't know. Maybe it is, but like, I could see someone saying a practice range, is that just going to be a fad? And I think what's happening is that, I probably digress from your question, but it used to be people call you up and say, I want 18 holes, and the expectation want 18 holes at a practice range. Now when they say, hey, I want to design new 18-hole golf course, they really mean 18 holes, practice range, big time short game areas, short course, lots of activated outdoor space, all kinds of things. And so I think that it's all changed, and I'm very respectful of the past. I think that's one of the beauties of the game, is that it is the royal and ancient game, but I'm very much a forward thinking person. And so it's very much about the future. And so I try to be aware of like how things are changing. And I happen to be involved in Olympic stuff, and it's a whole other story, but Thomas Bach, the current president of the IOC, talks about change or be changed. And so I'm very much into how do we change and adapt to, because the species is constantly changing and adapting.
So do you think that these amenities that many developers now want on golf courses, like short courses and, well-designed practice facilities and Himalayas style putting greens and things like that, are those opportunities for more place building at golf facilities in your mind?
Yeah, totally, 100%. So, that's what I think I was trying to say, and I got off track there, but exactly. I think those very much are. And, they resonate at a lot of levels too, because if you look at recreational activities in the United States sort of prior to COVID that were really growing quite dramatically, they all were what we call, they were unstructured in time, meaning you could decide to do them for 15 minutes, you could decide to do them for 15 hours. And so they tend to be things like running, hiking, biking, walking, things like that. Golf has always been very, very structured in time, in that, if you and I want to play golf, we have to show up at 10:10 and go march out for 4 or 5 hours. The thing that's been unstructured in time is practice. But there are people like me that get bored just hitting golf balls. And so part of the rise, I think, of short courses and short game areas and all this sort of what I'd call experiential practice is just a much interesting way to go do something in a short amount of time, and an amount of time that you can control. I think that's very interesting. And then we're big data people. So if you look at how a good player outperforms a lesser player, it's not putting like we've been taught, drive for show, putt for dough. But the reality is nobody really can putt. Like a PGA Tour player misses 50% of 10-foot putts. But what a short course does, it starts to eliminate so many of the shots that's hard for so many people. And it starts to bring people closer together in terms of skill level and performance possibilities. And so that could be, you and I, but it could be, you and your children, or you and your father, whatever it is. It's a way to really bring people together. And I think that's really, really interesting. And I think, if you have these interesting places, that's more than just greens, tees, and bunkers, that contributes to place and contributes to what's special. I think what we're changing, though, like how the species values place, it's changing. And so, not to throw too many stats at you, but 71% of all rounds of golf since COVID have been played by people under the age of 50. And so as this youth movement in golf is happening, the expectations are very, very different to something less formal, more adaptive to their lifestyle, all the stuff I'm trying to speak to. And so like what might, like I send people sometimes to Bluejack National, a place we do with Tiger outside of Houston. And every once in a while I send like an older sort of traditionalist, and like, they don't like it. They find it unsettling, like that it's too much. But you send a younger person and like, this is like adult Disneyland kind of thing. And so I think we're in this sort of flux mode. But you got to realize that who's playing golf is very much changing. And there's lots of stuff, wormholes I can go down about that too, of this new demographics that are coming into golf. And frankly, this is because of all this I'm trying to speak to. It's like the most exciting time in my 30 years of golf is literally right now.
Part of this is the different offerings of a golf course. It seems like there's a bit of a move away from the conventional 18-hole round and toward a more varied experience at a golf facility. I've seen this pulled off in some really great ways and in some less effective ways. I think it's probably all in the execution of these things. But certainly if you look at a short course like the Cradle at Pinehurst, that's been extremely successful, I think partly because of its footprint and its location. It's right there in amongst everything. It is a kind of concentration of activity and energy, and you can't help but want to be part of it. And that seems to be something that's really crucial to the success of one of these short courses or putting courses, is just where they are in relation to everything else. That can be the make or break decision there.
And that really gets back to what I was trying to speak to earlier about the flow and the connection and sort of the functionality, kind of how all this works. I don't think, to me, the stuff is it's additive. It's not like in lieu of. So, like, to me, you still have to have a great 18-hole golf course. It's just like the expectation is that these other manifestations of golf, and what the National Golf Foundation has stats on what they call off-course golf, which is all the golf entertainment stuff, and then on-course golf. But it's only a matter of time for the word is going to be used around all of this, because it's starting to just overlap kind of everywhere, and I think that's going to continue. So it's not, to me, that there's not a need for traditional 18 holes of golf. I think this very much is. It's just that there might be times in your life or in your day where you want to have another version of golf. And the one thing that's happened in the course of my lifetime is just the options we have as consumers just keeps going up and up and up. I remember a day when there were three televisions, three stations, three channels on the Welling household television, and now you look and there are thousands of different channels or stations, and my kids don't even watch television on television. So it's all sort of changing, and I just think golf was sort of stuck in this box for a long time. And stuck might not be the right word, but we were in this box for a long time, and I think that box is very much changing. And so to me, it's very exciting because it's very, very innovative. What's going to be next? And obviously with TGL and the screen stuff that you see happening, there's no doubt that there's going to be a big virtual component to this going forward. And we've been for years now working on various ideas around virtual, of how do we take advantage of everything in the virtual, but still have human connection and placemaking kind of around it. So I just think the runway for what's going to happen in golf is just going to continue to evolve, which is exciting.
Well, when it comes to the traditional 18-hole round itself, doesn't seem like it's necessarily going away, even if it's no longer as fully central to a golf facility, perhaps, as it used to be. But when you design an 18-hole course, a regulation golf course, are there different ways of routing the course or different things that you think about doing that can enhance connections between different players, even between players in different groups?
Yeah, I mean, we're known to go through 50, 70, 100 different versions of a routing plan before we settle on something. But we're worried about individual golf holes and having enough space and width to play, because we think that's what allows to create an experience where everyone can enjoy. If it gets to be super narrow, then it starts to be not so fun for higher handicappers. But we really like the idea of looping golf in different ways. PGA Frisco is a good example where, the one is relatively close to the core, but 18 is kind of far. But we go hit the sort of central overlook amenity, 3 different times. And that's somewhat by design. We wanted the idea of, you're there on a buddy's golf trip and you've met somebody at the restaurant, at the hotel the night before, you run into them at the range, and all of a sudden you're both playing the West Course and you run into each other 2 or 3 different times at this sort of overlook. So all that's by design, and there's some intentionality to it. And that overlook has fire pits and ways to stop and hang out. And so I think we're kind of thinking through all of that, thinking about the game itself, of how to have this experience that everybody can play and play together. But then we're also thinking about, can we have these moments and put people together? And we happen to be fortunate right now. We're doing Bluejack Ranch. I mentioned Bluejack National down in Houston. We're doing its cousin now in Fort Worth. And, there's been such success of these comfort stations at Bluejack National that's a central thesis of the development of, not just the golf, but like how can these things be accessible to people within the community? And they become, in essence, venues or gathering spots to help knit the whole entirety of the community together.
Well, Beau, this has been a really interesting discussion, a topic that maybe doesn't get talked about that much, but you are really great at explaining some of the finer details of it. So it's been very interesting for me to hear you get into it. Thanks so much, and good luck with your all the projects you have going on right now. You're
Thanks so much,
pretty
Garrett.
busy.
I always like when people ask me new things or different perspective, and so you get a triple gold star. So I really appreciate you having me on to think about these things, talk about these things. So thank you very much.
All right. Thanks so much, Beau. This episode of Designing Golf was produced by PJ Clark. Thank you, PJ. If you've been enjoying the Designing Golf podcast, then I can just about guarantee that you would like Club TFE. Club TFE is Fried Egg Golf's membership. You can find out more at thefriedegg.com/membership. But basically, we do a lot of content in there that you would be interested in if you've been into this podcast. So Designing Golf is coming back next week, actually. We're usually on this every 2-week cadence, but we have a Masters themed episode that we just wanted to get out before Masters Week itself started. So look for that coming to your feeds pretty soon. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again next week.